Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, who makes New Haven tick more than Mayor Toni Harp? I don't believe anybody. And she's right here in the WNHH studio for her weekly Mayor Monday checkup on what she and we are up to in the Elm City. Good morning, Mayor Harp. How nice to see you.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm well.
Good.
And, if you have a question for the mayor, feel free to pop it to us via Facebook Live. You go to the New Haven Independent Facebook page. You'll see the video right there. We'd love to hear from you. And thanks again to everyone who was weighing in with Fire Chief Alston last week. And thanks to the Gateway Community College and Bertram Moses PC for providing financial support for today's program. So, Mayor Harp, how you doing?
Doing good. How are you?
Good. So how's the Donald?
Well, thankfully he opened government.
He did.
Yeah.
But you were down there. I figured, he tried to get together with you once and you were busy. I didn't know if you guys connected this time.
Oh, no, not this time. But, it was interesting to be there when there weren't so many employees there. The traffic wasn't bad,
You flew down?
Flew down.
What day?
I flew down, I'm just trying to remember, on Tuesday, I believe. Yeah.
So the shutdown was still happening?
Yep.
Because later in the week, they stopped flying out of LaGuardia. Which my theory is that's why the federal shutdown stopped for President Trump, who's from New York.
Right.
It seemed like the ultimate symbol of impotence, if I may go there, that his home airport couldn't fly planes. It was an hour later that we got the.
Yeah.
I don't know. That was my theory.
No, I think you're right. I think that, and when you think about it, actually, when I was coming back, I overheard some TSA employees who were bitterly angry, and were threatening not to come back to work the next day. So.
Well, he definitely lost on this one by his own acknowledgement privately. He overplayed this one. I was so interested in Nancy Pelosi because everyone's always looking on our side of the world for that person who's going to stand up to Trump and stop him. Will be Mueller. And there was this just jubilation among that half of America about Nancy Pelosi maturely, firmly standing up to the president and prevailing on the shutdown.
Well, what was disappointing was that the balance of powers really didn't work.
Really?
Well, not really. I mean, certainly the Congress, but the Senate should have done something. I think they were totally irresponsible.
Well, they're fair. It's a Republican majority that's scared of the president.
Well, but they're supposed to be the counterbalance. That's what I mean by balance of powers. It shouldn't just be the Congress. It's got to also be the Senate.
Yeah. From your lips to God's ears. All right. So Toni Harp, you were down, Mayor Toni Harp, in Washington D.C. Now, when you were down a year before, was that, or 2 years before, when the president invited you to the White House and you smelled the setup.
Yeah.
So when he came time to call you out while he was rolling out an anti-immigration policy, you said, he was saying, Toni, where's Toni? And Toni knew better than to show up. Were you down again for League of Cities? Was the same thing?
I decided not to go to U.S. Conference of Mayors, although they were meeting during the time that I was there. I just went down to, we met with SAMHSA folks.
What are SAMHSA?
That's the substance abuse organization. They provide the funding for substance abuse treatment, and they do some of the academic work around that disease. But I met with the head of that.
Is that a government agency?
It is a government agency, and I met with the head there. We talked about some of the issues that we had here on the Green, and
interesting.
With maybe different ways in which we could provide. We talked about the opioid epidemic and how we could address it in a better way. And she had some really interesting ideas. She also let us know that there was a grant that came out that next day on Thursday.
And what was it for?
It's for programming, and it's most of their dollars go to the state. These dollars could go directly to cities. I guess they could go to states as well. But it was good to know that if you had some sort of innovative program that you wanted to try out, you could use that to.
Have you identified something in New Haven you'd
Well,
like to go
we actually had we had a group that was chaired by Commissioner Delphin Rittman and myself on.
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Delphin Rittman, Miriam Delphin Rittman. She's the Commissioner of DEMAS, Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services. And what we discovered about New Haven is that we are service rich, but and so there are a lot of organizations that provide a lot of different services, but they were not really connected well together. And some of the newer things like recovery coaches that other cities have, we just didn't have. And so the idea was that we needed a way to coordinate this vast system of care that we have here in New Haven.
And are we talking about like Hill Health Center and their outreach nurses? We're talking about App Foundation. We're talking about New Haven Hospital, the health department, the state.
Yeah, and CMHC programs that they have. There when you look at this thing, there are about 50 different activities that go on in New Haven, and the coordination is lacking. And the thought was that if we're going to really address the problem that we have here in New Haven, since a lot of the services for the region are provided here, then we really need to have a way to coordinate all of those things. And so one of the things that we don't have is something that is called CCAR, which is it's a recovery, a place where people can come who are in recovery that supports recovery. They have it in Hartford, they have it in Bridgeport, but we don't have one here.
What is it, a residential place?
It's not a residential place. It's a place where you can come in. If your treatment isn't working, they'll work with you to kind of work through that. If you're looking for a job, they'll help you get a job, but they actually help to coordinate a lot of the other services
and Mayor
that
Harp,
we
is
have.
this tied into the thought you had about locating near the green a place to kind of dry out momentarily? You might be smoking K2 and you don't really need to go to the hospital. You can be watched by someone as sort of a triage.
You know, I mean, I think that that certainly is something that could occur in a recovery type house.
So are you planning now to apply for money through this grant project program for a CCAR effort and a larger coordination of all the social services for addiction?
I believe that we are. And we know that some of those dollars we might be able to get from the state, but we'd like to also try to coordinate ourselves. So the state has promised to give us a street psychiatrist.
Yeah, has that happened? I mean, we could talk about
well,
that.
Well, what happened was that there was a change in government.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really clear whether or not the commissioner last year would be the commissioner this year. As it turns out, she was reappointed by Governor
And that's
Lamont.
Demas?
That's Demas.
Yeah.
And so I think that we'll be able to move forward on some of those things. But
is that psychiatrist or psychologist?
Psychiatrist. Because the other thing that we know about people who often have substance use disorder is that they also may have a DSM-3 diagnosis, which means that they really need to be on something that controls their mental state as well as their addictive state. And
dual diagnosis, meaning where you have emotional problems and you have a substance addiction.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so you really need to have someone who is there, and you can get treatment almost on demand. And that's what this street psychiatrist would do. They'd be able to prescribe, whereas a psychologist would not be able to prescribe.
Okay. So just to summarize, you went to D.C., you had some business on your mind, which was getting some federal support for efforts to deal with the opioid and larger addiction problem in New Haven. You met with the head of SAMHSA.
Right.
She encouraged you to apply to this new grant program.
She did. She told us that it was coming out. She thought that we should. She didn't promise that we would get the money.
Yeah, she can't.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I didn't want.
But it doesn't
I didn't want
hurt
everybody to think that she did.
But it doesn't hurt to have the person in charge.
Yeah.
Encourage you, and that you're planning to, and you're looking for those two reasons.
Right. And we met with our Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro in her office in Washington, and we talked to her, and we didn't physically observe it, but we kind of heard a fight that she was in with a woman who was the head of the child protection system in Colorado, who she believed was abusing
Ooh.
kids and not providing services to
Wow.
kids based upon religion. So she was there fighting the good fight. I got to witness that. You know, we are so privileged to have someone of her character in that role.
She does
And
fight the good fight.
she does. And then we met with Senators Murphy and Senator Blumenthal with the other mayors who were at U.S. Conference of Mayors. So um, Mayor Mayor Martin was there from Stamford, Mayor Ganem from Bridgeport, Mayor O'Leary, and a number of other mayors. And we just sort of sat around and had a discussion, one about whether or not how long they thought this would continue in terms of the government being closed, and some of the concerns that we all had around whether or not our housing authorities would have the resources to actually pay for Section 8 after the end of
So the lesson
February.
is next time we just got to make sure we quickly ground the planes at LaGuardia. And there'll be no shutdown. I'm glad that you didn't get grounded and that you were there to speak up for New Haven at
well,
the nation's capital.
It was great to be there and to see that our folks are definitely there working hard on our behalf.
And it's great to be here on Mayor Monday. WNHH-FM, 103.5 FM, live stream to NewHavenPen.org. We're starting the week with the way we love to start the week, which is running down what's going on in New Haven with our government chief executive, Bob. Speaking of chief executives from the grassroots, Bob, welcome to Mayor Monday. Thank you for calling.
Yes, good morning.
And Bob
Mayor,
has been recovering from some surgery, and I hear you're doing well.
Yes, doing much better, thank you.
That's
Hello,
great,
Mayor.
Bob.
How are you?
Good, Bob. How are you? Your voice sounds a little stronger, so you must be doing well.
Yes, it is. It's much better.
Good.
But I'm going to put you on the hot seat right now.
Oh, my goodness, Bob. Why would you do such a thing? You know, when I was a little girl, I had one of those stoves that actually warmed up, got really hot. And when you plugged it in, and I thought my mother had plugged it out, had taken the plug out, and she hadn't. I sat on it.
Oh my
So
God,
I
what
literally
happened?
know what it's like to sit on a hot
How
seat.
badly did you get burned?
I still have the scar.
Really?
Yes.
How old were you?
I think I might have been
Well,
2 or
it's
3. I
actually a
was
hot
young.
seat question I have to ask.
They don't make them like that
I
anymore.
received a lot of calls this weekend, and it's about the most recent shootings in the city. Throughout
Mhm.
the city. What are you going to do about it? What are the police doing about it? Why no arrest? So I'll let you answer those questions.
I don't think that counts as the hot seat, to tell you the truth. But, I think that's an easy-
Well, I mean, you know,
It's
sometimes.
all what question?
It's a good question. Yeah.
No, it is a good question. And, you know, it takes time. Thankfully, we have something called Shot Spotter here in our city. About 2/3 of our city is covered by that. And so we're able to get to the scene of a shot being fired relatively quickly. But that doesn't mean that in every case that we can determine who did the shooting. And so I would say that our detectives are working on it. We are moving as quickly as we can to figure out who's doing it. And, you know, honestly, I still believe that guns need to be taken off of the streets and out of the hands of people who would do others harm.
Now, it's really interesting you brought that up, Bob, because Bob always kind of asks questions based on what people are talking about on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And anytime you have a batch of shootings, that's really upsetting, you know, and we think about it. And some of us, like journalists, we go take the long view and say, well, we're down to about 50 shootings a year, which is lower than it's been since we've ever recorded violent crime in the city. But those are a big deal, those 50. So then when you have a week where I think we had 3 in a week, maybe even 4.
Mhm.
So that's a lot more than the average. And things go in spurts. We're going to have spurts, unfortunately, where we have someone kills 3 people they know, like they did a few years ago in a laundry. I mean, and it spikes it. And it's always hard to tell what's a new trend and what's just the ebb and flow of things. But the one shooting, Bob and Mayor Harp, that I'm trying to figure out was the shooting of the pizza delivery guy. We got very little information on that. And why would the pizza delivery person get shot unless it was a robbery gone wrong or unless there was a personal relationship that we don't know about?
Yeah, I think that we'll learn more as this is investigated. But I think you're right. It's probably one of those things. And there could be another one.
Probably the first.
Yeah, a lot of times it's a relationship issue, and one of the things that we've got to figure out in our city is how we find places for people who are having difficulty with one another to resolve those problems and to heal and not use violence as a way to solve problems with someone that any other day of the week you liked very much or you loved.
Also, I think that Domino's Pizza and some of the other national pizza chains, and maybe they've done this, I just don't know it. This is not a New Haven problem. This is just a sad situation.
Right.
Nationally, is when you deliver pizza, you get lured to places where people are going to hold you up. And we don't have a policy that you're only going to deliver to certain neighborhoods. And in fact, the holdups take place on the edge of middle-class neighborhoods, too, and to wit, Harrison and Whaley. So a couple weeks ago. So, Bob, I'm wondering what can be done, or Mayor Harp nationally, to protect. I say pizza because that's the most common one. There are other kinds of delivery, but it's mostly pizza. Could Papa John, could Domino's help fund really good study, real criminal justice study of what practical measures can be taken to make it safer to deliver pizza, to protect people if they're going to get held up? And maybe it'll be a less human interaction. Maybe there's a different way they'll give you the pizza when you're there. Maybe there'll be more cashless, which is often people who are ordering the pizza are the people who are a few people who don't have credit cards. But I'm wondering, I think this needs to be looked at because it's been, I've been looking at the crime log now straight for 14 years. And this just sometimes Chinese food, sometimes pizza, over and over and over again. It's not just New Haven. It's a dangerous job.
Sure. And it's the whole idea of delivery. And you know, I don't know what the answer is, but I do think it would be worthwhile for those national companies to look into that. Because as you point out, it doesn't just happen here. And everybody can't afford to have, you know, I learned this weekend about something called Cash.me. Have you heard of that? It's a cash app so that you don't actually have to have cash. But if you have this app on your phone, it can, and the other person has the app on their phone, you can send cash to folks without.
You got to do that because, and as you point out, there's an issue about people don't have cash because now nationally stores are wanting and restaurants to go cashless. Mason, whatever they call it, Mathis, the Belgian waffle place on Elm.
Mm-hmm.
They the only reason I don't know better is because nothing's vegan there, but a few things are. But they've gone cashless, and I like that because I have a debit card and a credit card, so I like that. And if I ran a store, I wouldn't want cash. But nationally, people have said that makes it harder for people who don't have credit or don't have a lot of money in the bank, so they can have a credit card or a debit card it makes it hard for them to shop. So I'm glad I hadn't heard about the thing you just mentioned. I hope they can work on something like that because I think just like ShotSpotter is technology that helped us deal with daily nuts and bolts of crime prevention and investigation, we need that now so that this can be safe. Because, you know, you never hear the stories about these holdups with these yuppie services where you get the kind of fancy meal plans where they deliver to you and stuff. I never hear about holdups of that.
No, and you don't hear too much even about, you know, like, what is that? When people deliver from Walmart or, you know.
Right. Yeah. I think it's pizza and Chinese.
Paul,
yeah.
I just had one more question along those
lines. I didn't know you were still there.
Yes, I'm still here.
You're going to have to do better in the hot seat this time.
That last one wasn't the hot seat. You jinxed yourself at all by having the press conference with the police chief on the murder rate going down and the shootings and so on and so forth?
You know, I don't think
and
so.
That's why all these shootings lately.
You know, I don't think they waited for my press conference to start shooting. But the truth of the matter is,
I'm just asking a question.
No, I mean, I think that they do it every year when they go down and when they don't go down. The police chief does that. And when they don't go down, we try to figure out how to help them go down. When they do go down, we basically, we say it in a way that, you know, honestly, and I think the chief did that, as did I, that we know that these things can go up. And we're just looking at last year. Last year, we had fewer shooting deaths. We had fewer shots fired. We had less crime across the board, except for assaults and sexual assaults. And so now
It's not true. We had more sexual assaults. We had more sexual assaults reported.
Right.
So until we reach that happy day when there are no sexual assaults, it's good if that number goes up because more people are reporting them since so few get reported.
And I
that's
think
my 2 cents.
Well, I think that's a good point. And the other point is that we then are going to look at ways that we can work with people around domestic violence, because oftentimes that's really what that is.
And, you know, Mayor Harp, I think Bob does have a good point that not that you jinx yourself, but that statistics are tricky. Like, we have good news over a lot of years about what's happened with the crime rate.
Right.
But there's always going to be a blip. There's always going to be a series of shootings like we had over the last week, and people are going to be upset about it and try to figure out, is this a larger trend? I mean, there is something cyclical about crime.
And I think that you're absolutely right, but in spite of the fact that there's something cyclical, and if you look at Hartford and Bridgeport, they all have had a reduction in crime, but not to the extent that we
No, we
have.
have good news to give.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. But,
And I think it's really important to say that our police department, our youth department, those that are really working hard on this, and they can see that they've made a dent in it, that we should at least recognize it. And as you point out, there may be shootings, there may be other kinds of things that happen. So then that gives us an opportunity to figure out, well, what do we do next? Long story short, I'm really proud of the work that we've done in New Haven, and I'm proud of our police force, our youth stat. All of these things I think have helped. But anytime somebody is shot, anytime there are shots fired and it traumatizes the community, that's one time too many.
So are you kind of saying that, of course, you're setting yourself up to have someone say you jinxed it, but that it's important to recognize when something good is happening so we actually understand the state of our city and see it in some perspective? But that it's a continuing quest to always keep it under control.
Absolutely. And one of the things that was really upsetting to me, you look at these online, the cities with the most crime in America. We're still on that list.
Why?
And, I don't know, because maybe they're using old data. And so...
I don't even read those lists anymore, including the good ones. I don't think they're based on anything real.
Well, they can't be.
You just live here and you know.
And, I think that one of the things that we want...
We don't even have the most crime. We're near the top in Connecticut.
I don't think we do. And yet, most people feel like we do. And as I said before, you hear one a gun fired, like somebody is shot trying to deliver pizza. That's too much, and we don't want that. But in the meantime, things have been worse in our city, a lot worse.
No, we have the lowest violent crime we've had since you and I have been to the city.
Yeah.
It's worth noting.
Sure.
But
we want to thank the people who've worked really hard to try to make that happen.
Hey, Bob, thanks for calling, man.
Just one more question.
All right, you get one more.
Grand Avenue Bridge. I heard it's going to be overhauled. Can you give us an update on that?
Thank you, Bob.
Sure,
Bob, have a great week, man.
You too.
It's going to be pretty much rebuilt. It's going to take about 2 years to do. We're going to have a public meeting. I believe it's tomorrow at
6 o'clock.
6 o'clock at Benjamin Jepson School. So if you have some ideas about it, you want to hear more about what is going to happen and how long it's going to take, please come out. We'd love to see you. We'll all be there.
All right. And you're right here on Mayor Monday.
And everybody knows where Benjamin Jepson is, right? It's on Lexington Avenue.
Which is off Quinnipiac, a block up.
Right. So
on the east side
6 o'clock tomorrow.
And if you don't know where it is, just look it up. Benjamin Jepson School. We got the internet these days.
Oh, that's right. You can look it up on your phone.
GPS and everything. Thanks for joining us on Mayor Monday, 103.5 FM live stream. Tom asks, what do you think of the findings of the Affordable Housing Task Force and which recommendations will you prioritize? Just to update, and Tom Breen asked this question. He wrote the article about this new report with 44 ideas, I think it is, all of which were real serious ideas about how you improve affordable housing in the city, that almost none of them cost money. And one of them that does cost money is still revenue neutral, which is to have more inspectors who pay for themselves and get more aggressive about fines for improper conditions at housing. But, getting permission to have the housing authority build in the suburbs, to have smaller lots, to have inclusionary zoning. Anything stand out from you on this list? And do you agree that this was a serious effort?
No, I think it was a serious effort. I'm intrigued by this idea of inclusionary zoning, and that, I think it's something that we can pursue here, but we should also get our suburban friends to pursue. And
so, any one idea stick out? Something you're gonna hope to see become a law?
I think we're gonna work on the inclusionary zoning piece.
It's really interesting, and I wanted to read more about it because I didn't know a lot about the term. So I read a really interesting article this morning, because our readers in the Independent always link to great articles.
Mm-hmm.
So I was busy, but I said, I'm going to read it. There was a great article from City Lab, which is this wonky policy site about inclusionary zoning and the pros and cons and how it's actually worked in places like Oakland and D.C. And the first takeaway I had from that story is that we are your administration has heavily done inclusionary zoning. It hasn't been a law. Other places it's a law. Anytime you build over 50 units, X percent have to be, if it's rentals, to 80% of the area median income. If you're doing ownership, you got to have some, to the 50%. And then sometimes you do it with carrots and sticks, which is that will give you permission to build denser and taller if a certain percentage has affordable housing in it. Other times we say you just have to by law. And we did that, everything from the 360 Tower to the project you had approved in the Hill by Randy Salvatore. And we're basically, I think, doing it, saying we're looking at you, say what you can do with the New Church Street South, that a certain percentage have to have affordable housing. And sometimes developers we just tell them to charge more for the other apartments. Other times we find them grant money. This article raised questions. It wasn't saying that inclusionary zoning is bad, but if it always accomplishes the goal, that sometimes they say such a small percentage of people get those units.
Mm-hmm.
One place where it opened up 95 units in Washington, thousands were applying. And that often they say it can have market repercussions that have less middle-class housing building in the end. And I thought about all the condos we had built in the 80s in New Haven, where everyone wanted it was just going to be for rich people, but they got overbuilt and they became the new middle-class housing and Section 8 housing.
Mm-hmm. And
one would argue there is that if you just allow a lot of building go on, the market works itself out. So I just talked for a long time about that issue. What do you think?
Well, I think that we have less land. When we first started doing a lot of building, we had a lot of land. We could use selling land as a way to get developers to agree to having more subsidized housing or affordable housing, depending upon how you look at it. And so as we run out of land and those kinds of things that require developers to partner with us, I think having a law would be something that would at least have us legitimately at the table having the conversation with the developer.
And one argument was that even if not large numbers of people end up having their affordable housing needs met, you're at least dealing with having a mix of people.
Right.
And that's a public good. It's interesting to say this. Oakland has a new one. It'll be interesting to watch how they do and whose predictions come true.
Okay, well, and I think, the interesting thing about Connecticut and places in the Northeast, we're such a small state. We have cities that are so geographically small. It's a lot harder than if you have land, and
so that's why the task force also talked about allowing denser building, having houses on smaller lots, make it easier to build mother-in-law apartments, so-called, and redefining who's in a family by how many people can be living in one building. You would express some concern about that because you're worried about the you don't want to have a poor quality of life that you're worried about if they too scrunch together on certain lots.
Well, one of the things back when I was in grad school is that they really looked at density, as a problem that contributed to blight. So I don't know. I mean, I think that, and I think what the unfortunate thing about Connecticut is the exclusionary zoning that we have that force everything into our cities, and so we're left with few options. And so that would be my only concern. I would certainly, maybe design can take care of that, but I would be concerned about, unfortunately, for a good reason, building in a system that contributed to blight.
I just love the nitty gritty of this policy stuff. All my nerd buttons. Elizabeth Warren's been talking on Paint Trail about everyone. We're all going to try to convince everyone to become nerds and love the policy details. She had people chanting for Consumer Finance Protection Bureau and whatever stuff. I love this because I think this affordable housing, I do think it's a really interesting report. And what you just spoke about for the last 30 seconds is an example of the very interesting nitty-gritty discussions we're going to have, because I think the community's on board. They want it. They want the concept of inclusionary housing and zoning, but what that's going to mean is going to be in the details.
Exactly. Yeah.
Aaron Good always has a good question. He says, "Thank you for listening, Aaron Good. Mayor Harper served on the board of the Charter School Operator Achievement First. Does she continue to have confidence in the leadership of AF?" Oh, good. This is a hot seat question. Given recent I'm sorry that happened to you when you were 2. That sounded like terrible to a kid. You sit on a hot stove.
I know, wasn't it? It was really kind of bad. It was.
It just makes me like, as a parent and now grandparent, I get a little. That's right. Kids survive. That's true. Mostly, I think. Have
Oh,
comment. I'm
Mark,
glad you
yeah.
did. The leadership AF, given recent problems at Amistad High School that Chris Peak has reported on for the Independent. Thanks for the credit, Aaron. Including an administrator shoving a student and revelations from a former employee, Stephen Cotton, about the problematic working environment and disciplinary protocols. Aaron, good, excellent job with that question. May your heart.
Well, one of the things that we did actually when the young girl was taken down at the
St. Patrick's Day Parade.
Parade, and there was a relationship between some of the things that are going on at Amistad High School, and one of the things that we reached out to them, and I think that reached out to them again and said, like oftentimes I think they put most of their resources into academics and not as much into social emotional kinds of services that their students need. And we've reached out to them. We reached out to them back then, and I reached out to them and said, we pretty much know what we're doing in this area in New Haven Public Schools, and we will try to help. And so I think it's the kind of problem that every school district runs into. It's just a question of how you solve those problems and how you use the resources that you have in that area. And I think that more and more often that the leadership, the overall Achievement First leadership is recognizing that they have got to do more around the social emotional growth of their students and their faculty and their leaders. And I know they put a high premium on testing and grades and all of that. And I think that they really have got to work more across the board, whether it be with the students, the faculty, the administrators, on creating a positive learning environment. And we can help them.
What did they say?
They listened.
Did they say yes? Bring us in.
When we talked to them and back with the St. Patrick's Day Parade, they sounded interested. I think we had a couple of meetings. When I talked to them about
what was
this,
their connection to St. Patrick's Day Parade?
There were some of the girls that were in
that fight.
That were in that fight were students
at
Amistad.
Did anything come out of that when you reached out that time?
I think that our administrations talked, and we might have sent some folks over for a couple of times, but not really anything ongoing. And the fact that these things have come up again sort of points to that. The other thing that that we are learning, and I think that some of what they've done to have kids achieve on a high level is just outstanding, and I think that we admire them for that. But that the social emotional side is not their strong suit, and that we again stand willing to help.
Now, and you're a lot closer to it than I am. I'm skeptical. They say yes, you know better how to do things in the school than we do. I think the whole premise of their school system is that our schools stink and they know better, and they're going to build something so kids have options.
Well, I think that they have. Look, they've been criticized for many years about when kids don't act in a certain way, that they just expel kids or they suspend them and they move them into our system. We still see that happening today. That we can't do that in New Haven Public Schools. We have to educate everybody, and they have recognized that, and they have said to us that they're going to work on it. I think that they still that there's more work that needs to be done.
They did say they're going to hire more teachers of color, and I believe they did in Amistad.
Well,
and we have, I think the public schools do put part-time social workers in at least the middle school on Edgewood Avenue.
Well, and I think that ultimately they obviously need more, and certainly in the high schools. And look, I believe in what they do with in terms of the grades, in terms of their kids getting into really good colleges. I mean, they do phenomenal work. It's just this last part that I think that they may need some help on. And we've reached out. That's all I can say.
And I've always followed your trajectory on this issue because it's always been interesting and nuanced. I mean, you you came out at a time when it wasn't politically popular to do so, where you said years ago in your state senate, we have to look at we're not doing well enough in the city schools. We have to look at other ideas.
Right.
We have to have alternatives. And you supported the growth of charter schools like Achievement First. When you became mayor and they demonstrated against the public schools, when you had someone from the charter school background in charge, and they were blasting you as being a terrible schools and saying the state should fund them because the New Haven schools are no good, you thought that was a bridge too far. And you
Right.
spoke about the original concept of charter schools, not replacing traditional public schools, but offering room for trying different models and experimentation that could be used by everybody.
Right.
And
And
now
to
you're
show
saying
that
it
you
could be
can
a
teach
two-way street.
everybody. Yeah.
And now you're saying it could be a two-way street.
It could be, because in all honesty, you know, one of the things, and I really don't want to say this on the air, but, you know, a lot of their young people get into schools. But, you know, if you look at the persistence rate of their kids, particularly in UConn, and our kids that go to UConn, our kids persist more. And that's because I believe they're more resilient. And so resilience is something that is important too. It's as important as academics.
And you think that's because we have social emotional down better?
I believe so, yeah.
That is so interesting. And, you know, that's why I said I think I'm always going to be interested in what you have to say about charter schools, because you've always kind of staked out an independent position on them with a focus on what's going to work for education. And it's a
Well-
very politically bifurcated issue.
No, I think it is, and it shouldn't be. You know, like, look, one of the things that they did first is to say these kids can be educated.
Right.
And the excuses of you know, the parents, of the kids are poor, of, you know, the teachers don't have enough time on task, all of these excuses are ill-founded. We can show you that it can be done, and they did.
Mhm.
And so now, you know, like everything, there's another iteration that has to happen. And and we all know, I mean, I think Peter Salovey was the one that talked about emotional intelligence and helped to define that. That's an intelligence that they've got to work on as well, as do we, but I think we're farther along.
Mm-hmm. Adam Christopherson writes in, that is great. Thank you both for your contribution, New Haven. And Adam Christopherson, thank you for listening to Mayor Monday, which you're all listening to on WNHH-FM 103.5, live streamed at newhavenindependent.org. So we're talking now, we just spent some time talking about things that didn't go right last week. It is amazing how quietly every week there seems to be some amazing announcement, 2, 3, of New Haven just entering this new age. We could talk about what that is and the nuances, but just it's so different from the first 3 decades you and I were in New Haven. I mean, let's just look at last week. This big new boutique hotel, 6 stories, 100, over 100 rooms, I think 108. It was on a surface lot where you got used cars at High and George. I walked through with Randy Salvatore, the builder, last week. That place is swanky.
I saw your pictures.
Emphasis
it
on
looks cool.
A. Wait to see Marquisha's pitching next week. What's on The Real Photographer? But I mean, that place was amazing. And then on the first floor, he lured this guy whose restaurant he went to in New York, who was a Michelin star chef. So I just said that as though I pretended I knew what that meant. I didn't know what that meant till last week.
Yeah, well, that's
Like,
cool.
that's like getting a Pulitzer Prize or
Oh,
Nobel
yeah.
Prize as a chef. We never had one in New Haven, apparently. I didn't know that because we do have amazing restaurants.
Yeah,
And he got this guy who, by the way, is this down-to-earth guy.
really.
I was just talking to him. You can see the video. It's just like some guy you're talking to. But it turns out he's like one of these, you know, Nobel-type chefs. And he's got a whole operation going. They're all running around, chef, and he's showing us how you chop up the locally raised pigs different ways to make this mortadella.
Pigs?
Yeah, the mortadella, all this pig meat stuff he was showing me. And it was like very fancy
He showed
food.
you the pig
Yeah,
meat.
yeah, it was kind of fun. Because I was saying, like, what's this called? Charcuterie. And he's showing me. We have a whole video of it. It's kind of funny. But anyway, the guy clearly knows what he's doing. He's so enthusiastic. He's doing this whole restaurant here after he's done New York for 10 years. And I
Wow.
looked it up. It's real. He really is like this big shot New York chef. And he's got a Michelin star, which most of them
That's
don't have.
impressive.
And so you have 30 people working in that restaurant,
Mhm.
20 more working in this hotel. And that's just on one little spot of land. I just think, and you got to, and last week we also approved the 132-room Hilton Garden Inn for a half vacant, well, all vacant, half surface lot, Elm and Orange. And just last week you were at a ribbon cutting for something I also knew nothing about, but I'll not talk about as though I knew what it was all about. Quantum computers, which is apparently the next big thing. The supercomputers of the future. They go so fast, they go faster than the super fast. And that means they're going to discover new drugs. They're cutting out years of trials. It means they're going to go through big data faster. That means they're going to solve all sorts of problems, as well as hope it doesn't get in the hand of those Russian hackers. So, and it turns
Especially
out,
that.
and it turns out that 2 of the researchers who made some of the big breakthroughs in research that everybody worldwide is using in this race to develop these computers are from Yale, and they formed a company trying to do it. And you were there with the governor. Oh, wait, no, you weren't there because you were in D.C. Okay, but your people were there. Steve was there.
Steve was there.
And they opened a big new lab, Steve Fontana.
Yep.
And they opened a big new lab at Science Park.
Yep.
And it's just like these things are happening every week. They're kind of a little bit below the radar.
It's very important, and we're blooming. We were a bud for a long time, and now we're sort of flowering.
And like, none of these people need breaks, right? Hilton Garden Inn doesn't have breaks. Randy Salvador didn't get breaks. They're racing to who can get these hotels up quick. So even if some of these other speculative ones never happen, like at the Union, like at Pirelli on Long Wharf, this one's open at Blake. They're about to start construction. They got the final approval for this Hilton Garden Inn. They're redoing the Dunkin' into this new swanky place. And like, well, I'll never stay at these places. It's going to get us tax revenue. It's going to get us jobs. It's going to get us people. People are going to go places and buy things. I mean, I don't see any loss in any of this.
And they're going to eat in at least one Michelin star restaurant as
I'm
well.
Sure people are going to be meeting for drinks at the Hilton Garden Inn at their bar and restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. And, and in spite of all, and the Hilton, you've also been able to save some of the historic value.
How are they doing that? There was
building.
A big debate about that, where they think in the insides with like the lobby and the vault and everything.
Yeah, right. They're going to have some of that. It's going to be around. It's going to look more like art, but it'll sort of link back to the history of the building.
I did like the inside, but I have to admit, like Pedro Soto, who's a historical preservationist and was on the side on the Development Commission for moving right ahead with this thing. You read about this in Singapore today in the New York Times. I happen to agree with Singapore. So sometimes when stuff's really ugly, it's not so, from the brutalist era, it's not so important to save it.
No,
I'm glad they're saving the inside. I'm glad people speak up about it. And I know this developer waited a few extra months to build this because he hired Colin Kaplan, our wonderful local preservationist, to think specifically about how to save that stuff. Yeah.
There he is.
There he is, a picture here in the NHA studio. But yeah, I don't see a downside on these.
No, I think it's really good. And we still have a lot of history here in New Haven. And, whenever I go other places and I say we're almost 400 years old, most people are really flabbergasted by that. Yeah. So we have a lot of great history, and we're growing. We're in the process of becoming everything that we thought that we'd ever be. So.
But as we grow, we need to do math.
Okay.
See, I was reading the news this morning in the Independent, and I was thinking about Barbie, who I relate to only in one way, is when she said, math is hard, let's go shopping. Although I don't like to shop. But we're going to have to do a lot of counting.
Yeah.
Because it's very important to know how many people are actually here as we grow so that we get federal support.
Absolutely.
So we're going to be having our census coming up, and there's a real concern in cities that everybody get counted.
Absolutely.
There's a sense, because of some of the moves by Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, that it's going to be harder for cities to be fully counted.
It's going to be really difficult. First of all, just
so we need higher order math.
Yes, and just counting frightens some people. And, sometimes you make mistakes about who's in your household because you think your household is just your family. But if your grandmother lives with you or an aunt and you just count your nuclear family, then, you may leave, people out.
I never knew about that part, especially if we get all these new mother-in-law apartments.
Zoning. That's right.
Got tied back. Yeah.
And the other thing is that they are wanting people to reply online. And we still have the digital divide. That's a real problem. So we want to be ready. That's why we're starting early. And
when are you starting?
We're starting tomorrow, right?
Tuesday. And how are you starting tomorrow?
Well, we're going to have a meeting. We're inviting everybody to come to 200 Orange Street at 4 o'clock tomorrow to discuss it. There will be an opportunity for those to find out what the job situation is like, because every time there is a census, they do hire people in the community. We'd like to assure that as many New Haveners get hired as possible. And we'll be learning about the process of the census over there and getting excited about it and figuring out how we can have the best count in Connecticut. How's that?
So that we count.
Yes, we count.
All right. So you got double goal tomorrow, Tuesday, with the kickoff. You want everyone in New Haven to get involved in the census and know how it works and accurately count everyone's here. And we know immigration is a big part of this.
Oh,
a big
absolutely.
immigrant population, as well as people here illegally and speak Spanish. Might sign up, and as you said, people on the other side of the digital divide. And you also just brought up, which I hadn't thought about, the trying to make sure local people get jobs. A lot of people worked for that census last time.
Oh, absolutely.
I remember that really tied a lot of people over.
Yep.
All right. So that's 4 o'clock, 200 Orange Street. And if you're listening to this show before it reruns after Tuesday, show up Tuesday
Right.
at the Hall of Records. Yeah, so quantum mechanics, that's pretty interesting. And then even Alexion. So people, a lot of times, a lot of development that has positives have some negatives, right?
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see the negatives last week on these, but in most cases they do. There was one move that I was surprised that people saw negatives in. So the Alexion Tower was a 14-story tower built at
Right.
100 College Street with state help. We kept the company in Connecticut by giving them corporate welfare from the state to move their headquarters there. They built the building, and they took 14 stories, but then they, after only like a year and a half, they said, we're moving, and they took half of it out.
Mm-hmm.
So last week, Yale announced they're going to rent the rest. So when I do the math, again, math is not my strong suit, Barbie and I, but the way I do the math is we got the building, we got it on the tax rolls, we got people working there, and Alexion left, so they had to pay the money back to the state with a penalty. So we didn't end up spending any taxpayer money after all for it. And now it's fully occupied with Yale workers. And even though it's Yale workers, they pay taxes because it's privately owned.
Right.
And some people were all mad. They say, you see, we're helping Yale again. And again, I think there are cases where really legitimate arguments about Yale's tax exemptions and does policy help them too much or not. What's the downside on this one?
I'm perplexed as you are. Look,
Well, there's a resentment of Yale.
well, but
But if they give
why
us tax
should there be?
revenue and
Most of the
jobs-
people who resent Yale either have relatives who work there or they are students there themselves. I mean, Yale is a reality. It was here before there was a state of Connecticut. And so they're here. Let's just kind of deal with them. I mean, the fact that this is a building that is owned and we can tax, that's really important.
And now it's full. So we want.
And now it's full.
So we can argue about Yale's tax exemptions, which I think is a fair argument. We can argue on specific. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm saying we can argue about it.
Mm-hmm.
There are different sides to that argument. Different sides on individual, issues in town about hiring. But creating jobs that go into a tax-producing facility that was originally helped with state money, now the money's paid back. That just seems like a huge win. I mean, we want the biotech sector to grow, right?
I think that we do. And, look, Yale was always supposed to be in that building. There was, it had been a part of the plan, maybe not as much as they have now, but they were going to have 2 floors in that building from day one. And so that shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. The fact that we lost the sales force and the executive team
Of
Alexion is unfortunate, but we've always had their R&D side there. There are 450 employees there, and they continue to do that really important work. That's the work that developed the company in the first place. And so now Yale is taking more than what they...
And it was the sales force that got in trouble for doing some sleazy stuff.
Yeah.
So let them go to Boston.
Let them go to Boston and do it, right?
The people here will pay for their lunch on George Street. And again, I think in the end, I'd rather have more of the Yale workers there because Yale isn't going to move to Boston.
Right.
Maybe West Haven, but not Boston. And so they'll be here longer term. And they had to pay the penalty, Alexion, to the state for having pulled those jobs out. So it was kind of a win-win there.
I think it was, and I'm with you on this one, Paul. I think that it was a win-win, and as long as Yale doesn't buy that building, I think we're good.
I thought Yale wanted Winstanley to build a second building they'd rent from on the Route 34 former connector land at one point.
Well, some folks are thinking now that this building is sort of taken care of, it's full, that he can sort of look to that site and perhaps there's something.
Because I think we've made out well with the Winstanleys and the Salvatores in this generation.
So. Mm-hmm.
They get it done too. Wham, bang, up.
Yep. Yeah. They're serious, yeah.
I read somewhere, I'm not sure where actually, was WTNA said you're reassessing homeless policy after a woman was found sleeping in City Hall with the activist Wendy Hamilton said she couldn't come to her apartment at 360 State because she'd have to put her on the lease. What was that all about?
Well, we are taking a look at our homeless policy and making sure. I think women have always had a difficult time getting a bed. We haven't had an adequate number of beds for women.
Not just New Haven. In Hamden, that's who's showing up at their new warming center. It's women.
Yes. And so I think we've got to really take another look at that.
So what does that mean in practice?
Well, that means, we're the only city in Connecticut that actually funds shelters. So I think we're going to have to take a look at how we fund and what we fund to assure that there are adequate number of beds for women in our town.
Okay. Carl Street Music Hall deal fell through. Any further thoughts? You were in the paper saying you're perplexed in the Independent last week. Guess we're not paper. About the nightclub that they were going to open up, and then it fell through with the parking authority.
Well, we haven't met with the leaders of the parking authority board yet, but look forward to meeting with them so that I can hear their side of the story.
Hamden's about to vote in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks, on a single-use plastic bag ban at stores. That if you go to a store, you can't get a single-use plastic bag anymore. We had one years ago. We stopped it, said it was too hard on a small business, and now Esther Armand, new staff, is drawing up a proposal based on advice from the Environmental Advisory Committee. Any thoughts on that one?
No, I think we're going to try to move forward to do our part to reduce the amount of plastic that is in our landfills.
And we did survive the Ozobot invasion in Dixwell last week, so things are well.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm aware of that.
Well, last week we learned about Michelin Star, quantum computers, and Ozobots.
Oh,
This is the latest new thing to teach kids about STEM, science, technology, et cetera, et cetera. They got these tiny robots where you draw a map, you draw a path with crayon in different colors. And then on an app, you get that this little robot will move according to where the colors tell him to move and how to do it, jump up and down and stuff. And it's really fun. And there are these two in the library system. There are these two women who started teaching this, and they had a regular program set up, including a STEM program at Stetson. And they brought them there, and the kids learned how to program robot movements with Ozobots.
Sounds great.
So, so now we learn Michelin Star, Ozobots, and quantum computers. Nothing can hold us back.
We're ready.
All right. Well, that time went fast because it always goes fast. I only got to half my list here, but you did get some hot seat questions.
I did.
And you seem better for the wear. Thanks everyone who sent in questions, listened, and just participate on Mayor Monday. Thanks for Gateway Community College and Bertram Moses PC for providing financial support. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. Now we know what it's like to be free. We just got to remember to book our flight even from LaGuardia now. Fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.